neither mutation nor natural selection support evolution. Whereas the evolutionist believes that mutation and natural selection serve as the engine of evolution. What do we mean by mutation and natural selection? First of all, natural selection. Natural selection says that nature picks out who's best and allows that to pass on its genetic material to the next generation. And it weeds out that which is weaker. Another word for that, survival of the fittest. Okay, that's what natural selection means. Natural selection means nature will never let a David defeat a Goliath. The better's always going to win. Well, if that's taken to its furthest degree and everything is evolving according to that pattern, shouldn't we just have a world of people? If everything inferior, nature weeds out. Well, by definition, we should. But we understand that there are inferior animals. What about mutation? Mutation says that there are changes, that there are mutations in genetic material and so forth, which just happen over time. And those changes are passed down to successive generations. I was watching a documentary a few years ago, and there was a professor of biology from University College London on that particular documentary. And he likened that mutation to a copy of something, or an original rather, of something being placed on a copy machine and then pushing the copy button. And what you would get out of the feeder tray would be an image which was a reproduction of the original. Okay, that makes sense. Now he said what's going to happen each generation is that copy is going to be different from the original. And if you take that copy and you put it on the copy machine, the copy of it's going to be different from it. And those are like mutations. Well, science has shown us that mutations do take place, but that mutations are always harmful. And you don't pass mutations down to successive generations. But I thought, okay, I'll just do his experiment to see what his experiment shows. And so I took the bulletin that I'd typed that week for the congregation at Independence, and I stuck it on the copy machine. And I pushed copy. Now, I labeled that bulletin 1 because that was my first generation. And I put it to the side. I took the copy and I put it on the tray and I pushed copy. And it made a copy, and I pulled that first copy out and I labeled it 2 because it was the second generation. And I put it down. And I took this copy out and I put it up on there and pressed copy, and another one printed out. I pulled it off and I wrote 3. Put it down. Got the copy that had been made, moved it up top, pushed copy. Another copy came out. I wrote on the one that was on the glass, 4. Put it to the side. I did that for 9 generations. The 9th generation, I compared with my original bulletin. The original bulletin had a picture of the church building on it. The original bulletin had our worship times. The original bulletin had the phone number and other things that you have on your typical bulletin. The copy, you could barely see the picture. Some of the words were easy to read. Some of the words had almost faded to the point where you couldn't see them. Those mutations had taken the bulletin and had turned the bulletin over 9 generations into what was more or less a white sheet of paper with a few letters and some faint designs on it. I learned two things. Number one, actually three things. I learned, number one, that the quality goes down because of mutations. Number two, I learned that the original still had to have a designer. And number three, I learned that he really should not have used that illustration to try to prove his point. That was a bad one. That did not serve his purpose at all. But I'm sure some people watching that at home were going, oh, makes perfect sense. I bet mutation does take place because we use copy machines. Sometimes people will accept anything, won't they? Let's define a few terms. Evolutionists like to use the word fact. They like to use the word hypothesis. They like to use the word law. They like to use the word theory. I've actually been in a classroom where the teacher said that evolution is as much a law as the theory of gravity. Now, that's a pretty biased statement, because we know that even the evolutionists, by definition, call it the theory of evolution. And it's the law of gravity. But he purposefully flipped those terms to try to say the one is just like the other. But it's not. Let's consider these four words defined. First of all, what's a fact? A fact is a truth known by actual experience or observation, something known to be true. To be a fact, then, something must have been experienced of or observed. Neither the Big Bang or abiogenesis or evolution have ever been experienced or observed. Neither can they be. So if you have a teacher that says that evolution is a fact, he's wrong. By definition, it's not. What about the word hypothesis? A hypothesis is a tentative explanation for an observation, phenomenon, or scientific problem that can be tested by further investigation. A hypothesis can be tested by further investigation? Then the Big Bang and abiogenesis and evolution are not hypotheses. What about the word law? A law is a formulation describing a relationship observed to be invariable, never altering, between or among phenomena for all cases in which the specified conditions are met. Therefore, a law represents that which has been observed and is repeatable. Neither the Big Bang, abiogenesis, nor evolution is a law. What about the word theory? A theory is a set of statements or principles devised to explain a group of facts or phenomena, especially one that has been readily tested or is widely accepted and can be used to make predictions about natural phenomena. A theory works to explain facts, especially those which have been repeatedly tested. The Big Bang, abiogenesis, and evolution are not theories. Even calling it the theory of evolution does it too much justice. It is scientifically only the assumption of evolution. What do I have, about 5 minutes left? Okay. Why would somebody accept evolution? It's not science. Why would somebody accept evolution? I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, I think a lot of people accept evolution because they're afraid not to. If you want to be a scientist, then you may very well want to accept evolution because you're taught that any scientist that's worth his salt believes that evolution is a fact and believes that God is a myth. And students, therefore, who believe in God are ridiculed in the classroom to the point of being called flat earthers, and their scientist counterparts are called backwater scientists. Well, you can't be a creationist and a scientist, the evolutionist scientist will say. Well, why not? I believe in the one who set forth the laws of science. I can be a scientist if I want to. Some will accept evolution because they want to compromise theologically. Did you know that the Catholic Church accepts evolution? Pope Pius called evolution a serious hypothesis. There was a cardinal in New York. His name was Cardinal John O'Connor. He said perhaps the spirit of life, or the Spirit of God that breathed life into man, was a lower animal. That's a terrible statement. The Catholic Church has been trying to compromise on evolution. It may be that some accept evolution because of media concentration. Through television, news programs, documentaries, reality shows, sitcoms, cartoons, magazines, the internet, newspaper, video games, other media, those who watch, those who read, those who hear, those who play, and many of these things are force-fed atheistic propaganda in lethal doses. And so we think evolution must be true. So that media concentration causes some to believe in evolution. Some believe in evolution because of wishful thinking. They want to not have a God telling them what to do. How many people would be quite content to be their own gods? I know a lot. They wouldn't have to worry about anybody telling them they're wrong about anything. So some people will wishfully think that evolution is true because if there is no God, then man becomes his own ultimate authority and therefore is free to justify in himself and his fellow man anything which suits his self-originated morality. Some accept evolution because they simply don't know what the Bible says. The Bible offers a sound alternative to evolution, but some have never been taught what the Bible says about the creation and about the flood, about the origin of man and so forth. And then some have accepted evolution because of what you might call denominational disillusionment. Have you ever noticed that in the religious world there is a whole lot of division? Do you know some people see that division and think, you know, if there's that much division in the religious world, there must not be a God. I mentioned that one of the teachers that I had who was very adamant against God said that evolution is as much a law as the theory of gravity. Do you want to know where that fellow had gotten his start? He had been a denominational preacher. And he had seen all the division in his denomination. And he had seen the divisions in other denominations. He'd never been exposed to the Lord's church. But he had seen the divisions in the denominations, and he thought, well, if those who claim to follow God are this divided, there must not be a God. And he became the worst opponent of Christianity that I've ever had in a class. Denominational disillusionment caused him to say there was no God and to accept evolution. That's why science, true science, will never make anybody be an evolutionist. Simply won't. This morning we've discussed, or this afternoon now, we've discussed what evolution is. I hope this has been a reasonable introduction and you can appreciate and be further motivated to study these things. Thank you very much.
Afternoon. Brother Dan preached half my sermon already. The idea for this lectureship was really born in 2011 when I first started thinking about this. My wife had bought some DVDs for my daughter Leia, and what did you buy it or did you get it? I was here at the building, at the crash, and these were DVDs that were labeled as religious, and so obviously she thought it would be good for my daughter. For our daughter to look at something that at least it's a movie, but it's religious. And it spoke about the creation, and there was one about Noah's Ark and so forth. And I looked and I didn't look at it before, and I should probably watched it, I don't know how many times. And one day I was sitting with her and we were watching this, and she put it on, and I noticed something weird, that this DVD that was about the creation actually taught theistic evolution. You know, about the way the whole started, like Rowan explained it. And then we broke it up. We just broke the DVD. And then one day I was sitting with her again and we watched a DVD on Noah's Ark. And but from the animal's point of view. But the first thing, and what they were teaching, that there wasn't only 8, there were 2 stowaways as well. Yes, 2 stowaways. But besides the 2 stowaways, we had the young lion was chosen to be the representative. And his partner. But there was an ape on there as well. He's Messias. And this Messias was homosexual. With pink lipstick and all those type of things. Now can you see what our youngsters are exposed to? And they get taught from a young age to doubt what they read in the Bible. And they're exposed to this, and if we just keep quiet and remain silent, that's what they're going to grow up to believe. And then when we teach them scripture and they listen to sermons, they're sitting there and they start doubting, is that true? But I saw on a DVD. I heard a scientist who studied at Harvard, who has a PhD. He told me this. He taught me that. So why can't I believe? You only went to Memphis for 2 years. You can't compare to someone with a PhD. So we take this type of lessons. We should take it very seriously. And I know this is probably the first of its kind, or a series of its kind here in Cape Town. And I hope that those of us who were here and will be here tomorrow, that you think of purchasing the DVD. Not just for yourself, but also you can give it to your family and give it to your friends so that they can listen to these messages that have gone out. Because this will really help us in our Christian walk. Yes, it's not about other topics that we normally hear on a Sunday and we normally have for gospel campaigns. But this will really strengthen us. This will really keep us focused on the things that are really important. And this will really guard us, or help us guard against those teachings that are destroying the very fabric of our religion and the way our children are thinking about God and how they are formulating their opinions as to how they're going to worship God one day or how they're going to serve God. These will have an impact on those decisions. So this is very important. The lesson that I'm going to be talking on this afternoon is, does science refute or prove the creation argument? And I think it's something important that we have to discuss, because science to a lot of us is a mystery. A lot of us don't understand what science is really about, and Brother Dan touched on that briefly, and I'm glad he left a little gap in there for me to fill in. But science is defined as follows. It derives from the Latin word scientia, which simply means knowledge. As you said earlier, it means knowledge, or to a greater degree, it is knowledge based upon the observation and testing of facts, worked into an ordered system, acting as a base for new knowledge and a guide for ways of getting it. And as we look at science, there are basically 3 different types of science. We have physical science, that's non-living material like astronomy and geology and so forth. Then we have biological science, which is living beings and plants and animals and so forth. And then we have intellectual science, mathematics and logic and so forth. But for us to have a correct view of science, one has to have a proper understanding of what is known as the scientific method, which is a collection of rules and principles by which one arrives at true scientific knowledge. I'll briefly go through this, but Dan has mentioned a few of these, and I've got one or two different here. But just to reinforce what was said earlier, this method, how do we arrive at true scientific knowledge? Well, number one, there has to be the observation of facts. You and I, one must be able to perceive the data empirically, as what Brother Dan says, by your senses. You must be able to hear it, see it, smell it, taste it, or touch it. You must be able to have it in your possession, or must be able to see or feel it. Now, if the subject is incapable of sense perception, it cannot be subject to the scientific method. Hence, according to the definition provided, could never meet the criterion of true science. Then we have the statement of a problem. Is there a proposition that may account for the facts of a phenomenon? If so, one may propose an hypothesis, as Brother Dan explained what it is, as a possible explanation. An hypothesis is advanced, which is then subject to what they call a testing process. Right? Number 3. The testing or experimental process may subsequently suggest that the hypothesis is either false or it is perhaps true. There's an age-old saying, science without experience is sheer speculation. It has to be shown, tested or experimented on to be shown as true or as false. Then number 4, if an increasing body of experimental evidence seems to support an hypothesis, it may become classified as a theory. A theory is not proof of anything, brethren. It merely suggests that sufficient evidence has been gathered, has been brought together already to warrant further testing. At this point, we must emphasize that any view which cannot be subjected to a testing process cannot and must not qualify either as a hypothesis or as a theory. For example, the origin of the universe, human beings. We cannot be labeled as proper science, according to their own definition of science, because they are not capable of being tested. Finally, once a theory is formulated and is widely tested, the facts may appear to be so firmly established that the phenomenon receives the status of law. It is thus proper to speak of the law of biogenesis or the law of thermodynamics, etc. It is not proper, let me reiterate, it is not proper to regard the idea of evolution as a law, let alone a theory. We've got to guard against that. Having introduced science and what it all stands for and so forth, I want to just say one more thing here before we proceed. That this science, and we have admired a lot of scientists, Isaac Newton, Louis Pasteur, and all these wonderful men who did a lot of great things. We admire them, but even science and scientists has its limitations. It has its limitations. It is limited, firstly, to sense perception. If a proposition cannot be physically examined and subject to empirical analysis, it simply does not fall within the domain of science. A concept to you and I may be perfectly valid as the idea that God exists, but it cannot be argued quite logically. It can be argued quite logically, but it cannot be demonstrated scientifically, because our God, your God, my God, cannot be put into a test tube. It cannot be put under a microscope. The common view regarding the beginning of the universe is called, as we have heard, the Big Bang theory. But the notion cannot be classified legitimately as science. Why? We cannot test it. It cannot be perceived. No one was there to witness the commencement of the universe. No one even captured on video or any cell phone to see how it actually happened. The Big Bang idea is pure speculation which runs counter to a significant amount of evidence. Number 2, science deals with the present, with the here and the now. Since genuine science demands experimentation, and since experimentation has to occur in the here and now, it should be obvious that any event alleged to have occurred in ancient past does not fall within the scope of true science. Again, this rules out the idea of man's supposed evolutionary origin. Number 3, Science is limited to the explaining how things work and cannot address such issues as why it happened or why did they happen. Now we know, we've heard of forensic science, and we all see the movies CSI and those kind of things on television, and we get an idea what forensic science is. But if, for instance, they can explain how a person was shot, where the bullet was fired from, how it entered into the body, but forensic science of itself cannot determine whether that was murder or whether it was suicide. It had to have had other kind of information which is required to reach a better conclusion as to how this all came about. Number 4, science only deals with matter, materials. It only deals with matter. J.W.N. Sullivan, described by Time magazine as one of the most brilliant interpreters of physics, adamantly stated that science is confined to a knowledge of structure. Structure. Remember that one cannot scientifically demonstrate, for example, the existence of the soul, because it is not material. It is not matter. Attempts have been made to weigh an individual before and after death, to determine is there a difference once the soul departs from the body, to determine the density of the human spirit. But those exercises have been futile, because they cannot confirm through scientific process, or they cannot deny it. Number 5, science deals with phenomena that are repeatable. We've heard that earlier as well. It cannot address unique once-off events such as miracles and so forth. One evolutionist notes that in science, and I quote, observations and experiments must always be reported in such a way that they can be repeated and verified, and must always be repeated and verified before they are incorporated into the body of knowledge. Evolutionists claim that life accidentally jump-started itself. Can that event be repeated? Can that event be verified? Can it be tested? No. But they believe it anyway. Shame, double shame. Has science blundered in the past? Yes, it has. Science has blundered. Yes, science has been brilliant. There have been brilliant men who devised brilliant and invented brilliant things which we benefit of today, which you and I can learn and grow from, and which makes our lives a bit more convenient and easier in this world today, and prepares us for the future with technology and so forth. But even great men who we hold in high esteem have made mistakes and has come up with false theories and even laws which are not by its definition. We admire them, but sometimes along the way they have lost the plot. Science has been littered with many men who blundered, and these blunders have been of colossal magnitude. Big, massive. Yeah, I'll just give you an idea. You heard of alchemy before? Well, alchemy says that there's a notion that common metals can be turned into gold. That's a big blunder. It cannot happen. Then we have spontaneous regeneration of life. Then we have the recapitulation theory, which is the idea that during the nine months of the gestation period, listen to this, folks, the human embryo passes through the major stages of its evolutionary past. You think that's a blunder? I can see some of you shaking your heads. Of course, it's ridiculous. It is nonsense. Then we have the geocentric theory, which states that the sun revolves around the earth. Absolutely ridiculous. The fact that many believe that the earth was flat at one stage. Ridiculous? Yes, it is. And there are so many, but there's too many to mention for this hour that we have available to us. But the most outstanding thing of all, however, is the fact that our Bible, the Holy Scriptures, though composed over a span of about 1,600 years, never endorsed a single one of these baseless theories, which some scientists held out to be the truth, absolute truth. The question, is the Bible accurate from a scientific point of view? Is the Bible accurate from a scientific standpoint? Well, we know there's a statement that's been made. The Bible is not a book of science, and there